Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Showing Up to Life podcast and YouTube channel. My name is Art Burns. I'm really excited to be here with you on a Sunday morning for me in Colorado, and wherever you are and whatever time and day it happens to be as you're listening to my voice or watching my face here on the video. I hope that you're experiencing a moment of clarity, a moment of presence, a moment of acceptance and letting go, and you're experiencing the conditions for happiness. And I hope you're able to, if you're not experiencing that, if you're feeling something other than any of that, I hope you recognize that you're in the right place, because these practices that we talk about are the way that we can return to those qualities of the present moment. And we can do that with kindness and compassion for ourselves and for everyone else. And so whether you're in the moment of, in the moment experiencing the conditions of happiness, or you're not, you're in the right place. So we're going to celebrate if we are, and we're going to remember that it's just a matter of returning if we're not, right? This work is not about always being something. It's never about that. It's never about a rigid adherence to some, quality that we must attain, such as happiness, right? It's okay to be unhappy. But the difference between being actively happy or unhappy and living within the conditions of happiness really means that you are able to recognize the root of what is causing the unhappiness, and you're able to, again, meet that with the same compassion, the same acceptance, the same ability to let go and to come back into the moment, okay? And so that's what I just want you to know, all right? So today, this is the podcast where we talk about mindfulness, or, I really I don't know. I would love to hear from you. Do you like the word mindfulness, or does it feel somehow, for me, mindfulness can either feel very sort of mystical and sort of, woo-woo, if you will, or dogmatic, maybe even is the word. Like it's like religious, right? Or it can feel sort of, it's insignificant in a sense, right? Like when I hear people say, yeah, you got to be mindful of, the way that thing happens, it's like, well, no, that you're not supposed to use that word in that context. That's not right. But of course it is, right? So I wonder what you all think of that. So I would love to hear from you what you think of that, because I actually prefer to use, and I find myself drawn to using other words, something like mind training, right? Because that's really what it is. When we hear mindfulness, it feels like, it's again, that almost feels like that adherence to, like, if you're mindful, you must be always calm and like a monk, and that's not true. Like, that's not even true for monks, for one thing, but it's not true for you and me or anybody here listening to this podcast. And so I guess I would just love to hear your opinion. And while we're on the topic of reaching out to old Art and telling him what you think, which, by the way, you can do this on the Spotify. If you're listening to this on Spotify, there's like a little poll down there that you can, leave comments and stuff. And so anyway, I just want to, but while we're on the topic of reaching out to Art and telling him what you think, I want to take a moment and I want to thank you all, okay? And well, I mean, certainly I want to thank all of you for being here to listen to this, right? But I want to especially thank the people who reached out yesterday, between yesterday and today. You know who you are, whether it was a comment on YouTube or it was an email you sent me. I just want you to know that I really, yesterday's podcast was a little difficult for me. I really, that was a vulnerable place. I was way out on a limb. I was outside my comfort zone. And by no means was I trying to, I hope this came across, by no means was it something where it was like, okay, if I don't make money, I'm not going to do this anymore. It's not at all anything like that, okay? And so even though there were no donations, it's totally cool. I just want you to know that I appreciate everyone who reached out, because that in and of itself is an act of generosity, okay? So thank you all. All right. That said, what I want to talk to you about today is the way in which this mind training, right, can and really, and that's the other thing that the concept or the term mindfulness I think misses a little bit, right? Mindfulness sounds like, it sounds like something that you just either are or aren't, right? And it belies the reality that it's about practices and exercises, right? Because it kind of loses, like, mindfulness doesn't sound like a skillfulness, right? So that's why I prefer the term, something along the lines of mind training, right? Because that indicates that you're doing something, you're working on something, and you're creating a skillfulness, because that's really what it is. And one of the skills that comes from this skillfulness, and what I want to discuss today, is the skill of critical thinking. Now, critical thinking in a nutshell, and this isn't a dictionary definition or anything like that, but essentially, critical thinking is about recognizing that we're all seeing things from our own sense of biases and our own experiences that are very limited, right? Like my experience as a white person growing up in, New York City is vastly different from someone who is, say, a person growing up in India, right? And that's just one example. You can come up with millions of examples that are completely different. And so the thing is that as we grow up, as we live the life that we live, we put together a sort of catalog of the way things work and the way, we're supposed to be in this world, and the way the world works, and the way people operate, and the way they think, and the way they do, and all of that. And so, but the reality is that because it's all based on our own experience, which of course is part of that experience is education, right? And travel, right? So somebody who's done a lot of traveling, for instance, has more of an understanding of this than someone who lived. Like, I remember meeting a guy on a bus heading to Montreal in 1999 for a hockey tournament, and this guy was like 26 years old, and this was the first time he had ever been out of New York City. Right? So somebody like him versus somebody who, got to travel the world with their, or lived in other countries with their military family or something like that, is going to have completely different notions of what the whole world is like, right? Or how people operate in other worlds, right? In other parts of the world, I should say. And so critical thinking is about, sort of bringing our awareness to all of this, understanding that this is the reality, that we're seeing things through a certain lens, through a certain prism that is not necessarily all encompassing, right? There's other points of view. There's other details. There's other data that we might not have access to. And so critical thinking is sort of bringing the awareness of that, and then essentially being able to question our own understanding. And let me tell you, folks, when we get to do this, it helps in every aspect of our lives, right? This could very easily be a Casual Fridays episode here when we talk about critical thinking. It could also be a parenting episode. It could also be a caring for an elderly parent episode. It could be a romance episode, a dating episode. It could be anything. Because critical thinking is, again, that ability to step outside of our own sort of constructed understanding of the world and step into a space of objectivity and questioning and curiosity. Now, the way this all works, right, the way that we sort of build this library, right, this sort of contextual library of how the world works and how people interact and all that kind of stuff, is really rooted in the first 8 years of our lives, right, for all of us, right? When we're, developing in that first stage of brain development from the birth until about 8 years old, your brain is filled with what we call mirror neurons at that age, right, which we still have as adults. We have some, but not as many. Mirror neurons are the thing that if I were to hit my thumb with a hammer as you watch me banging a nail into a board, you would actually feel that. You would experience my hitting my hand with a hammer, right? And so that's essentially how we're living our whole lives from 0 to 8, right? We're just absorbing all of these experiences as a felt, a felt experience for ourselves, right? Not just seeing the way this person talks to that one and somehow cognitively, cataloging that. No, while we're watching them, we're feeling them talk to each other. We're experiencing what it feels like for this person to talk to that person. And if it's yelling, well, then that's what we're experiencing. If it's kind and compassionate, well, then that's what we're experiencing. And then that becomes sort of our worldview, the way that we process everything that happens throughout our whole lives. That's the foundation. So I want to read you a quote that I recently saw on social media. I'm gonna switch to a different window on my computer so I can read this to you. You might lose the video here for a couple of seconds and see my Art Burns coaching logo, but nothing will change with the audio. But if you do lose me and my handsome face, I'll be right back. Okay, this quote is attributed to Michael Faraday, who is a scientist in the 18th or 19th century, involved with electricity. Honestly, I don't know specifically. He's an inventor of something. It's like, oh crap, what would we be without him? So it's a big deal, right? But a quote is as follows: "I hold my theories on the tips of my fingers so that the merest breath of fact will blow them away. I hold my theories on the tips of my fingers so that the merest breath of fact will blow them away." Isn't that wonderful? And so that's what critical thinking is about, right? Of course, he's talking about theories as a scientist, but we could easily, substitute for the word theories, we could substitute opinions, beliefs, understandings, what I think I know. Right? And that's what critical thinking is all about. It's the ability to sort of challenge ourselves in that way, right? To challenge, because the thing is that the thoughts and the opinions and the beliefs and the theories of life all arise from that felt sense of our experience, all from that, rooted again in the first 8 years, but it continuously happens, right, as we experience life. So again, someone who experiences life in many different ways, right? Somebody who has traveled to Asia, for instance, and experienced people, how they live there, which is completely different from how we live here in the West, right? This person is going to have a more balanced view of the way, two different people could possibly think about it, and would have a more natural and easy, accessible way to say, wait a second, maybe I'm just thinking like a Westerner right now. I wonder what someone from the East would think about this. And that then creates the critical objectivity of being able to hold our beliefs and our theories and our premises for all of our arguments with the very tips of our fingers so that they are very easily scattered to the wind, because that's how they should be. Because the reality is, even somebody who has traveled extensively is still operating from this place of, I know what I know. This brings up another sort of quote that I like to, or not really a quote, but an idea or a premise that I like to point out to people, is that in everything we know, right, there's three basic spheres, right? There's what we know. There's what we know we don't know. And then the biggest fear of all is what we don't know we don't know. And that's what critical thinking is about. It's about reminding ourselves that we don't know what we don't know. That there's very possibly something that could just the merest, breath of fact could scatter this idea that I have, this opinion, to the wind. Now, the reason why this is so deeply connected and entwined, or the reason why mindfulness or mind training allows this to be true, this critical thinking to happen, because it's not something you have to train necessarily, although there are practices I'm going to tell you about now that do train critical thinking, but you don't have to, right? Even without anything, I'm never even hearing the word critical thinking, people who do these practices are going to automatically become more critical in their thinking. Okay, just because it's the way that we're basically training ourselves to let go and to accept and to see things without the judgment and without the prejudgment of our own opinions and our own sort of, vantage point, if you will. So what that means is, now let me talk about so the opposite of what I'm talking about would be something like what they call cognitive dissonance. Okay. Cognitive dissonance would be, let's say there's a politician that you really have always loved. You've always trusted this person. You've always, believed in them. You've believed they were a straight shooter. You agree with what they say. You voted for them over and over and over and over, right? And they're your guy or your girl, right? And then news comes out that, oh my gosh, this person who was involved with insider trading or involved with some sort of, really, something that you deeply, deeply object to, right? Many people in that moment, instead of allowing their belief of this politician to rest gently on the tips of their fingers so that this merest suggestion of something improprietary could blow it away, right? Instead, what we do sometimes is, and many times, we cling to the idea that no, this person has to be a good person because this is who I've loved my whole life, and I refuse to believe that they're not a good politician. And so then we'll start creating, well, it must be the news reporter that's lying, or it must be the witnesses that are lying, or it must be this, or it must be that. And we go through all these different machinations and gymnastics to create some story that allows us to still cling to the belief that this person is infallible on some level. Now, of course, it's a very simple, example, but I think we can all relate to this on some level, right? What happens when, someone who you know and love and, even someone who's been married to you for years can sometimes reveal themselves, and you've all of a sudden you realize that I never knew this person the way I thought I knew them. Now, again, cognitive dissonance for many people will not allow that to happen. They'll say, we'll get into a fight and we'll say, how did you, we'll kind of figure that there's some sort of betrayal happening. But you just didn't know what you thought you knew. That's all that really happened, right? And so this is something that we can, again, yes, we can practice this actively, right? And this happens, there's a beautiful practice called RAIN, R-A-I-N. RAIN is an acronym that signifies, recognition is R, acceptance is A, investigation is I, and non-identification is N. Okay. Now, the way this works, right? Let's say you got something that's going on with you, that it's troubling you, some big thing going on, right? The way you would work with RAIN is first you would want to get into a meditative space, take a few breaths, really, sort of settle your mind a little bit, try to like focus yourself on, yourself, right? Just to sort of clear things, right? Focus yourself on when I say yourself, I mean on the physical body breathing self. Okay. And I can send you, if you want, I can send you written instructions for this. So all you got to do is send me an email. I'll shoot them right back to you. Okay. And if you don't like to do email, you can certainly just comment here too. That works too. Okay. Okay. So let's say you got this thing going on. You want to perform the RAIN practice. Okay. So you take a few moments and you focus your attention on your breath, let yourself come into the moment, right? As a meditative process. Now you're going to bring to mind the thing that's going on. Right, I did this a few years ago quite a bit. When I had first learned this practice, was a time where my son went through something kind of difficult with a Little League coach who was really, really mean and really, really harsh. And there was a moment where he made my son cry on the field, and I felt like afterward, not only was I angry that he made my son cry, but I also felt like I was, like I should have done something. I failed my son. I should have stepped in and defended him, right? Although that probably would have created more problems. But again, that was the thought process that came from my own experience. I have trauma of my mother, red-faced, veins popping out of her neck, yelling at a soccer coach because I didn't play enough, right? So there's a whole thing there, right? So that's the thing, is that my experience tells me you have to say something, right? But the critical thinking of me in that moment was like, wait a second, is that going to cause more harm than good? Right. So anyway, in the aftermath of this, I had a lot of, shame, a lot of guilt, a lot of different feelings of like, being inadequate and being a poor father and stuff. This is stuff that shakes me to my core. So I performed the practice of rain. Okay. So again, I actually used to do it on my bicycle. Okay. Just ride for a few minutes, get myself into the rhythm. And then I think about the thing. Okay. Now, as I'm thinking about it, I apply rain. Okay. First is recognition. This is exactly what happened, okay? As I know it to be, okay? So there was a baseball game, there was my son, there was the coach, there was crying, there was me, okay? That's what happened. Now, I don't know anything beyond that. I'm not getting into what the coach was thinking, what my son was saying. This is what happened. Recognize it. Now, accept it. That this happened. My son was made to cry, and I did not get off the stands and get onto the field and do something violent against the coach, right? That is the acceptance of what happened. Now we get to the investigation, and this is the part that really applies to today's episode here. We're going to investigate in a very specific way. The first thing we're going to do is investigate our body, emotions, and thoughts. Okay, so we're going to come into our body. Where do I feel this right now as I'm thinking about this? Where do I feel it? Is there a tightness in my chest and my eyes scrunched up? Do I feel my jaw clenched? Am I sweaty? Am I squeezing my bicycle handles? Where am I feeling this? Now, what emotions are present right now? And this can be tricky. Sometimes it's hard to differentiate emotions. So just name a couple or just recognize that there's some emotional upheaval happening, right? Now we get to the thoughts, and this is the part that really applies to what we're talking about today. So sorry for the long walk for the ham sandwich, for the vegan ham sandwich. In the thoughts, what we want to do is we want to first again, recognize the thoughts. Like, what are the thoughts right now? Specifically, let me turn towards them and really pay attention to exactly what my thoughts are saying right now. Because oftentimes the thoughts are just in this background track and we're not really aware of specifically what they're doing. And instead, we're, sort of just being motivated blindly by them. Okay? So in this moment, really listen to the thoughts. Now, we got to challenge those thoughts. And we can do so with a very, very simple question. And look, you can do just this part of the practice. Like, you don't have to do the whole rain thing, but I'm giving you the whole thing because it's really beautiful. But just in any given moment of the day, of your day, when you have a thought about something, you can ask yourself a couple of questions. Number one, how do I know this thought? I know this thought is true. Okay, which means, how am I am I filling in details of this, right? Am I building my understanding of this on certain assumptions that I believe to be true? And secondly, I can ask myself, what if the exact opposite is true from what I think? Like, so in other words, if I'm thinking that this coach was acting as from a place of anger and meanness and exploitation, what if he's acting from a place of fear and insecurity and terrifying, maybe he's worried about me getting upset that he didn't get my son to play better. What if, again, I don't know which one's true, right? Because I'm not in his head. I'm barely in my head sometimes, right? So I can't say for sure. So there it becomes this question. And once we start asking those questions, we start, whoa, wait a second. There's lots of ways in which this could be happening here. Now we go to the investigation from the thoughts into what the person who taught me this practice is Jack Kornfield. Tara Brach also teaches it. I've heard her do it too. And in this moment of the investigation, Jack calls it investigating the dharma of the situation. And I'm not a Buddhist, but the way he describes that is that, basically the truth, the your truth of this, right? Which is to say that we're going to pay attention to what brought me to my thoughts, what brought me to my understanding of this, and why do I believe that it's true, right? Which is to say, again, wait a minute. My experience of my life, including those first 8 years, was, my mother. And this didn't happen just once. I mean, this happened with every single situation, which is why I really hated sports as a teenager. I didn't do any of it, right? Because I had such negative experiences because my mother was always yelling at the coaches, always. I mean, she'd even be calling them on the phone and yelling at them. It was horrendous. That's why I think that I got to get out of this chair and go fight this guy or something. So that's, again, the idea here is to give yourself some time to see, where could this have come from? What in my life has produced this understanding? And then, just like we challenge the thoughts, we could say, if I grew up with a completely different set of experiences, for instance, if my mother was supportive of me and helping me to get to be a better player and therefore, earn more play time rather than yelling at my coach, how would I perceive this situation then? It's a powerful exploration. It's a powerful exercise. Now, once we've gone through this investigation of, again, what Jack is calling the Dharma, what I might call the sort of underlying circumstances or the sort of conditioning that we've all gone through, right? Once we've done that, we realize that it's not me that's doing this, right? It's not it's not me as my intentional, balanced self. It's the part of me that has been conditioned to do this unconsciously. And therefore, now we step into a place of non-identification. And once we see things in a state of, or in a posture or relationship of non-identification, then we're able to step back from it and take a look at it. I can hold it up to the light. I can turn it over. I can shake it around. I can put it on the table, walk away from it for a little while, come back later and see what it looks like. I can do all kinds of stuff because it's not me. Non-identification is very well expressed in a very simple statement. Most of us say, I am angry, which is an identified way of looking at your emotion, because you are not angry. You are much more than angry, right? The anger is just one little part of what you're experiencing. So the more appropriate and more realistic and the more correct way to say it is that my body is experiencing anger right now. It's a separation. It's a detachment that allows us then to be critical of it. Because once it's us, and that's kind of the thing, is recognizing that our thoughts are not this beautiful, pristine, expression of our authentic, genuine self. It's just a product of our experience. Because when we do consider, or if we don't consider the opposite, we assume that our thoughts are an expression of our authentic, genuine self and the most true thing that could possibly be, well, then challenging that is to challenge our very essence. And nobody wants to do that. Okay, nobody wants to live through that process, because what if we're wrong? What if, you mean I've been wrong my whole life? That's a devastating thing to try to grapple with. But if I see my thought as just a neuronal, connection that's based on the association of what I'm experiencing now and what I've experienced in my past, okay, I can be a lot less attached to it. Okay. There's a monk who wrote a beautiful book. It's right here on my shelf called The Joy of my desk, rather, on The Joy of Living. And his name is Yonggi Mingyur Rinpoche. And he calls the thoughts neuronal gossip. Isn't that awesome? Like just your neurons are just gossiping about what's going on here, right? So there's a neuron that's my mother, and there's a neuron that's the 6-year-old me, and the mother is yelling, "Get out there and yell at that coach! What are you doing?" But it's just like a couple of laundry ladies or old men sitting on a bench and just like the peanut gallery. What? I don't have to listen to that. I don't have to be beholden. I am not beholden to that. I don't have to allow that to motivate me in any way, shape, or form. Now, the thing is that the thing already happened with my son and his coach, right? It doesn't do anything to change anything like that. But what it does is it offers now the opportunity for me to talk to my son about it. And not talk to him from the place of this guy who feels like he should have punched the guy in the nose, but instead talk to him about, maybe he's operating from a place of fear and pain. And that way I encourage my son to think critically of it. And that is a big deal, right? That's really important. And that's what we're all doing all the time anyway. Even, whether you know it or not, there are people looking at you and saying, I like the way he does that. I like the way she looks at that. And that's how we're constantly developing in our experiences. So by you practicing critical thinking and being vocal about it when you feel comfortable doing so, you are going to resonate that with people around you, which is a beautiful thing, which is why every single time I do a guided meditation, I say, we're doing this work for ourselves, for our own benefit, and for the benefit of everyone else around us, from the most anonymous strangers to the most intimate loved ones. I'm going to leave you with that one. I wish you well. I'll be back again soon. And thank you again for all your support and all your kindness and all your attention. I hope you experience the conditions for happiness all day long today. But please remember that the conditions of happiness are just a moment of non-judging awareness, of acceptance and letting go away. Okay, that's all you got to do. And we instantly return to the conditions of happiness. All right, everybody. Take care. Wish you well. And let me know if you want the written instructions for rain. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.